On today's show, I'm doing an in-depth scouting report on Israel's Deni Avdija. Michael Bolton.
Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com and at Yahoo Sports Australia. And you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. And today's episode is brought to you by rockauto.com. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. We are doing a scouting report on a player that has been highly requested, and that is Israel's Deni Avdija, who played for Maccabi Tel Aviv this season. A player who, when I've done my mock drafts, it's consistently, you've got Deni way too low, top 5, top 3 player, and I've had him at like 9 and 10, I believe, in those mock drafts. Now, he comes out. Let's talk about what Deni is as a player. Look at some highlights for him as well for those of you watching on the video. He is a 6'9", small forward, power forward, 19 years of age from Maccabi Tel Aviv. He didn't play a huge amount of minutes, as is pretty common over in Europe, just 20 minutes a game. He averaged only 8 points per game. 4 rebounds, 1.7 assists, which translates to 7.5 boards and 3 assists per 36 minutes. 1 steal per 36, 1 block per 36. Overall, those numbers are not super encouraging. A low free throw rate, but most troubling is the fact that he was a 52% free throw shooter this season. 52%. That is rough. That's really, really rough. He shot 34% from 3, 43% three-point attempt rate, which is okay. Now that's not a great three-point percentage, and the fact that he has been a poor free throw shooter over multiple seasons in Europe, multiple competitions in Europe, is probably the biggest cause for concern there in terms of his projected three-point rate. He hit about a 3 a game over his 47 games this season, and at 34%. Now, overall, his two-point percentage is pretty strong. 51% from the field overall for a true shooting of 58. And for a bloke whose free throw percentage is whack and his three-point percentage isn't good, for him to still put up a true shooting of 58 just shows how good he is on as a finisher, as a two-point shooter. And that really is the strength of him. The assist numbers are pretty solid, especially for a forward. He's not going to be able to run as a point guard or even really as a primary point forward type of a player. But he does have really strong vision. He is quite a strong passer, and that obviously is a big tick for his game moving forward. He's more of that secondary, tertiary ball handler, playmaker type of a guy. But if he can't get the shooting to be respected, there is going to be a problem, because if you can't shoot at all as a secondary playmaker, then you're just not going to be respected enough to see those passing lanes open. He doesn't have that same sort of vision as players like Lonzo Ball, Ricky Rubio, Luka Doncic, those sort of guys with that elite passing, Ben Simmons, who can still thread that needle. He's not that level of a player or of a passer. He strikes me as a guy who's very much like, I can do little bits and pieces. I don't want to say jack of all trades, master of none, but that's sort of where he fits. Because he does have some areas where he's really, really good. He's a solid enough defender. But we'll talk about that a bit later. When we're looking offensively for Avdija, the number one thing that will stand out and should stand out when watching him play is his ability to cut. He is a really, really strong cutter to the rim, and when he gets to the rim, a really, really good finisher. He finished at about 76% at the rim. His other offensive numbers, his other shooting numbers, they're really rough. He's 26th percentile on catch and shoots, 3rd percentile off dribble jumpers, 29th percentile overall as a shooter. These are really, really rough. He's really strong at getting to the rim. His ability to draw fouls around the rim is a big positive. But if he's not being able to shoot, if he's not being able to work in catch and shoot off dribbles, how is he going to get that sort of ability to generate his own offense and getting to the basket? Now, his ability to cut and playing alongside other players who are good passers, you're going to have to utilize that. Like putting him alongside Nikola Jokic in Denver, who's one of the best players, not only in the current NBA, but in recent memory of hitting cutters. Gary Harris has made nearly a whole career out of that. Yeah, Avdija's ability to cut to the rim with a guy like Jokic throwing those passes to him and his ability to finish and then draw fouls would be a real positive. That is where his strength lies. But everything else, and if you're drafting him in the top 3 or top 5, you're expecting him to be a guy that can handle things, can be the number 1 player, to be an offensive engine, to be a guy that sets up others. And I just don't think that he is that player. Such is the case with so many players in this draft, is yes, if they were at number 15 and going to a playoff team, fitting in as a second, third option, I think that'd be really, really good. Really strong rotation players that excel when placed in better situations, but they are not that elite type player who can turn a bad team into a good team, who can shoulder a high usage load and come out the other side smiling. I just don't see that for really many players in this draft at all, hence the overall weakness in it. Before we get on to more about Deni, rockauto.com. What a great way for you to save money on auto parts. You go to a store, an auto chain store, and you're looking for a part. I don't really know anything about cars, but say you're looking for a fuel injector. Is that a thing? I think it's a thing. You go there, the bloke goes in, what type of car you got? And you tell him, he goes, that's not a very common car. And then he's got to type on his computer, search up the parts, and it'd be 3 or 4 weeks. Why can't you do that? Well, you can. With rockauto.com, you look up the parts, you get yourself the parts delivered directly to you, and you save up to 100% on these parts with rockauto.com. You're cutting out the middleman. You don't have this price-tiered system that a lot of places have in terms of professionals or do-it-yourselfers. Get the parts delivered to you with rockauto.com. It's a family business, and they've been serving the auto parts customer community online for 20 years. So when you go to rockauto.com to place that order, if you write "Locked On" in the "How did you hear about us" box, that'll let them know that you came from us. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. All right, so back to Deni. Working in the post, I think he can be a pretty strong option there. Offensively, I think he's in terms of looking at other small forwards, and this class is pretty rough for small forwards. I think he's a better option than Isaac Okoro, and I believe in my last mock draft, off the top of my head, I did have him going above Isaac there. He translates in statistical translation in the Jacob Goldstein's PRPM draft model. He comes out as number 8 in this class, which I don't think is an outrageous position to have him. He's got him also there behind Isaac Okoro. I don't really necessarily believe in that. But when you look at his overall fantasy translation numbers, they don't come out all that well. And that's in large part because of low steal and block numbers, poor free throw percentage, lowish three-point volume, and for a guy that's a good passer, low assists, along with low usage. Like his usage rate was not very high at all. I'll bring it up and see exactly what it was. For this period over last season, where we usage 18.5, and that's the thing. Like, yes, you don't expect, and I think his usage might actually be a little bit higher in the NBA versus the way things run in Europe. But he's not this high 28, 27% usage guy that's really valuing creating for himself and creating for others. Not great stuff for him. A better assist to turnover ratio, a positive in terms of over 1, so that's a good thing. But overall, there's a lot of things that are a little bit troubling, and under 15 PER as well, and that was down at under 11 in EuroLeague play, which is even more concerning at that higher level of competition. And when he played in the EuroLeague, his assist percentage was actually lower than his turnover percentage, which is somewhat cause for concern there with Deni. Other things we look at with him, again, defensively, I think he is solid. I think he can hold up defensively. I don't think that he is a lockdown sort of guy. He's got a pretty decent level of athleticism. He's not a great athlete, but he's also not slow. He gets out in transition. He can hit cutters in those transition passes, but also be the cutter himself. And he's got decent athleticism. Defensively, he needs to get stronger. Like, I think he's got good technique. I think he's sound. I think he's got decent enough length and good size. but he just lacks strength. He doesn't protect the rim, and that's not uncommon for 6'9" power forwards or small forwards, the way that Deni is. But he's not someone who... I think he's going to be someone that, because he's white and not super athletic, he's going to have the reputation as a bad defender, and he'll almost certainly be better than what his reputation is. But I don't think he's necessarily going to be a good defender. The defensive metrics, the steals and blocks, those raw numbers are pretty low as well. So I guess that's a level of concern there with him. Defensively, I think you can throw him onto power forwards at times. Yeah, small forwards, it depends on if you're throwing him into Kawhi Leonard, it's probably going to get into trouble, or into Kevin Durant or LeBron James. Like, there's going to be issues with Deni guarding those guys. But you're throwing him onto other threes who aren't that elite level, onto other fours who might not be at that elite level. I think he's going to be serviceable, smart team defense. One-on-one stuff is probably going to be somewhat of the concern with Avdija as he moves forward. Now, offensively, I think we look at him as this guy, again, who's a piece. He's a part of a puzzle. He's a guy that is a connector type piece who's better suited to being a late lottery pick in a regular draft. But this is not a regular draft. He could very easily go in the top 5. I think any comparison for Avdija through to Luka Doncic is insane. Yes, they have a similar height. Yes, they are both white. And yes, they both come from Europe. There's your similarities. Avdija is a pretty good passer. Doncic is an excellent passer. Avdija struggles with his shooting. Doncic is a much better shooter than that. Even though the numbers, you go, well, his percentages aren't different. There's a very, very big difference in the types of shots that Doncic is taking and the volume of shots that Doncic is taking versus Deni, who can't even be a 55% free throw shooter over multiple seasons, which is a huge, huge cause for concern about how his shooting is going to pan out in the NBA. It's massive. I wouldn't be stunned if he's not even a 32% three-point shooter coming up this season. And if he ever had a season of exceeding 38% from three, I would be surprised with Avdija. And that is an issue for a guy, again, who's not a high-usage player, who's probably going to be a 3-and connector type offensive player. I don't really know if that's a real classification, but that's sort of how I see him. A guy that you handle the ball, you can grab the rebound and distribute and be that cutter. But if you can't provide offensive efficiency with your own shooting, then it really limits. And that's really the key thing here. Can his shooting, which the form is not great, but it's not the worst, can he turn into a reliable three-point shooter? It's not an outrageous looking shot form. I think it looks relatively solid. I think one thing about him that's really good is his offensive positioning and his ability to take the right shots. He finishes around the rim at an elite rate. He takes a bunch of threes, even though the conversion isn't that high. And that's why we have him at such a good true shooting percentage, despite not being a good shooter. So if the shot comes around, and I'm not ruling that out, his ability to take the smart shots, to take the right shots, mean he could be a really, really efficient scorer. Handle that in with his ability to pass, or combine that with his ability to pass, with his ability to be an average to above average defender, to be a upper level cutter and rim finisher and free throw drawer, then there is the ability for him to be a starter level player. I under no circumstance see any sort of all-star type appearance for Avdija. I don't see him as being a top 3 player on a playoff team. I could see him being a 5th player on a playoff team or a top 3 player on a lottery team, maybe. I just don't see massive upside on him. Yes, he is a guy that I've heard about for many years. And always, he's going to be a lottery type pick. And nothing has changed with that as we come forward to this draft coming up. But I think we're getting the hype that he received in Europe. Some of that is a little bit mistranslated coming across to the States, to the NBA, and the comparison with Doncic is asinine. Luka Doncic was the MVP of the EuroLeague. Like the MVP of the EuroLeague at age 18. We have to get that through our head, how crazy that is. Avdija started 5 games in the EuroLeague this season and played 14 minutes and averaged 4 points. He shot 28% from 3. They are very different players. Very different. And their level of accomplishments are very different. the path for Avdija becoming a star like Doncic just isn't there, in my opinion. Now, it is hard to remove biases when you talk. It's hard to get things out of your head. But when I see him, I watch him play, and it's because of the position, because of the size, because of the fact that he's a white bloke from Europe, and the fact that I've seen teams like the Cavs mocked to draft him. I can't help but get Cedi Osman out of my head. And that's lazy, I know that. But Osman's a solid enough defender who is a solid enough ball handler who can't really shoot. And all those things can be applied to Avdija. Now, Avdija is a better passer, a significantly better passer than Osman. He's a much better cutter. Therefore, I think his offensive game is going to improve. But he's also a worse free throw shooter and a worse shooter overall. But there is some similarities there of a bloke that you can throw out and be an okay performer at a 3 or a 4 who can occasionally have good shooting nights but can go missing on low usage and be a passer but not a primary passer. Like, where does that utility fit in? One thing that's really strong about Avdija as well is his assist chart. The guys that he assists, he is spotting them up underneath the rim. High value shots. So his assists, not all assists are created equal. His assists are high conversion ones, which is great. Yeah, for Maccabi, there's on a chart on the Stepien, 88% conversion on his passes that would have been assists under the rim. Like that's pretty good. Like, it's getting in the right spot. Defensively, we have those concerns. I don't think it's anywhere near as of a problem as what it could be or what it is going to be framed to be. But there is obviously some worry there with him defensively. We'll get back to it a little bit more about Deni in just a sec. But I do have to tell you, Built Bar, you know about Built Bar, the best tasting protein bars that you can find. But there's even more good news with Built Bar, because for this week, 50% off everything, and all profits from Built Bar for this week will be donated to charity. So, Built Bar, 16 flavors plus special edition flavors they throw out there. High protein, low calorie, low sugar, and 15% off. 100% of all profits donated to organizations that support education, poverty, equality, and ending hate and racism. So all of the profits that are sold this week will be distributed to those charities, and it's 50% off as well. So there's no better time than go to Built Bar than right now. And you also save $10 off your first order by using the promo code LOCKEDON. So go to BuiltBar.com, $10 off your first order with the promo code LOCKEDON, and 50% discount for this week as well. So head to BuiltBar.com, get yourself the best tasting protein bars money can buy. All right, so back to Avdija. Let's look at sort of a mock draft. And again, I've done mock drafts already. You know that. And he hasn't been as high as many people would have hoped. And I don't think there's any doubt about that, because the comments that I get in the YouTube videos, Deni should be top 3. Deni's definitely going here. And I personally just don't necessarily believe that. I had him going at 9 in my latest mock draft. I had him at 11 the draft before that. Could I see him going up at 6 or 7? Yeah, that's how this draft sort of looks. It's a weird one. But I don't see him jumping over the top 5 guys, which is LaMelo, Anthony Edwards, Killian Hayes, James Wiseman, and Onyeka Okongwu. To me, they are the top 5 guys at this point. Deni could be at 6 in that group. He could be behind guys like Obi Toppin or Isaac Okoro or Halliburton or Vassell or any of these guys. Probably wouldn't have him. He's ahead of guys like Cole Anthony, Josh Green, Pokusevski, Kyrie Lewis. He's ahead of those sort of players, but not someone that I think can push ahead of Okongwu, Wiseman, Hayes, Edwards, or Ball. There are just too many concerns with me about how he translates as a shooter, how he's used offensively, where he fits as... You can't have him as a number 1 guy. And I could be wrong. Look, things could change with him, obviously. He could develop in a very different way, and development is not often, always non-linear. Things change and weird stuff happens all the time. But for Deni, I just don't see him being that star-type player. Really good player, smart defender, very smart offensive guy, great shot selection, great shot IQ, solid finisher, really, really strong finisher from Avdija. And all that sort of thing is a big positive when we talk about prospects and their value in the NBA. Now, again, looking at this mock draft type scenario, if we look at the top of the draft, and we're just going by odds at the moment, the Warriors at number 1, I really don't see them going in that direction. The Cavs, they're currently sitting at number 2. Well, if they're picking at number 2, I don't really see that. But I think he would fit. There's a hole there. Kevin Porter's been playing some small forward this season. Chetty Osman's in the mix. Kevin Love, Larry Nance at power forward. Who knows how long they're around. I think Avdija could make sense for Cleveland. Minnesota, with Juancho Hernan-Gomez manning the 4 position for most of the season, or most of the end of the season there. Avdija could slide in there at the 3-4. There's Jarrett Culver and Josh Okogie as well. He's obviously a different type of player to those guys, but that's just another bunch of guys that doesn't shoot. With Okogie, Culver, and Avdija, I'm not really sure he's the guy that fits there. In Atlanta, Cam Reddish, DeAndre Hunter on the wings, Kevin Huerter's there as well, Johnny Collins at the 4. I could see Avdija coming in there. His role would be pretty limited on that team, and maybe that's the best thing for him overall, but how did he translate to a starter ahead of those guys, I'm not really sure. In Detroit, there's Sekou Doumbouya. I would prefer to have Sekou versus Avdija as a prospect. But there's obviously room there in Detroit for him. For the Knicks, RJ Barrett, the 2, the 3, the 1, wherever you want to fit him in there. There's obviously room for the Knicks for anybody. I think Avdija could work in New York, considering he's a low-usage facilitator, cutter, smart shot maker. That would make sense given some of the other players that are around there. For Chicago, White, Markkanen, Levine, Avdija, I think he fits as that lower usage sort of a guy. I think that actually is one that does make quite a bit of sense depending on where Chicago falls. If they move up into the top 4, I don't think that's the direction they go. But if they stay at 7, then Avdija could make some sense there for Chicago. The Hornets, Miles Bridges, PJ Washington, you've got the Martin brothers. I'm not sure Avdija is really the guy that they need. Not to say that they can pass up on any talent. If he's clearly the best guy available at their pick, then that's a direction that you can go. I'm not sure that's going to be the case, though. Washington at 9, their small forward spot is pretty rough, so absolutely a position there. Phoenix, he will be in a much smaller role. Oubre and Bridges are holding down the 3 and the 4. Šarić may or may not be around. Cam Johnson's there. I don't think they necessarily go in that route. They're probably more looking for a guard, Phoenix, but he's in play there. And then San Antonio at 11. I could see them going in that direction. But again, another bloke who can't shoot is really rough for that team, and they desperately need shooters. Sacramento would make a little bit of sense, while the Pelicans... I'm not certain with the Pelicans, with Ingram and Zion at the 3 and the 4, if he necessarily makes a ton of sense. So he is an intriguing prospect. He's definitely an NBA caliber player, and he is a rotation player, no doubt about it. Is he a starter on a good team? Probably barely on the right team. And I could be really wrong about Avdija. I just don't really see it with him. I don't see what he does spectacularly. Finishing, cutting, great. Drawing fouls, love it. Passing, looks good, doesn't happen enough. Defensively, Shooting, Like, there's nothing good about those two things, the shooting and the defensive side. They're not good. So, we are probably 3 years away from him being a consistent starter in the NBA, but I worry if he goes too high, he'll be pushed into a role that he's not ready for, and he really sucks, and the shooting numbers are terribly rough, and he can't handle any sort of role where there's high usage. I think there are significant concerns with him there, but he's a smart player. He's a good team defender. He's a good team offensive player with good shot IQ, ability to spot up blokes, hit them in the right spots. All that stuff is super important. But overall, I'm just not certain of his star upside, but he is absolutely a rotation caliber, long-term NBA player as we move forward. Let me know in the comments below who you'd like me to do in the next scouting video, which will probably come next week. Drop that down below or tweet it at me. And don't forget, subscribe Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and on YouTube. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.